Welcome to Spiritual Awakenings International event with Dr. Jeffrey Long. As everyone is coming into the room from the waiting room, I'm just going to say hello to you in 7 different languages. So, hello and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue. Herzliche Willkommen. Hola et buenos dias. Buongiorno. Bon dia. And hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly Spiritual Awakenings International Presents event. It is a real joy to have you here. We are truly an international organization, which is why I welcomed you in 7 different languages. We have already grown in the 6 months since we were born, since we launched, and spread into 45 different countries around the world on every continent except Antarctica, which is so awesome. So we're going to have all of you muted during our presentation, but we would really enjoy if you would write into the chat box where around the world you are joining us from. We know we have somebody from England, somebody from Holland, from Canada, from all across the United States. And so just it's fun to know where everyone is zooming in from. And also, you know, if you have any questions that you wish to have answered during our question answer period, please put them in the chat box whenever they pop into your mind so that you don't forget about them later on. Anyway, that's all I'd like to say in our welcome. I'm now going to turn it over to the Vice President of Spiritual Awakenings International, Robert Baer, who has some opening remarks.
It's a real honor to have everybody here. Thank you so much. And we have a great presentation today. And I'd like to do take care of a few housekeeping things. First of all, again, the format of the meeting, everybody is muted except the speaker. Please use your chat box for questions. And at the very end, our secretary, Linda Truex, will moderate the question and answer period. Want to thank Tamara Calder Richardson and the Seeking Heaven, the Near-Death Experience and Phenomena show for co-sponsoring this event. Thank you very much. They are an affiliated group, and we're very grateful for their involvement in this. And we have some people that are prominent, and they're on our circle of honor. And we'd like to spend a few moments to thank them in particular. That's Dr. Pim van Lommel from Holland, Dr. Francis Liu, and of course our own Dr. Kaysan. And I'm going to turn this over back to Yvonne Kaysan, Dr. Kaysan, for something special. Go ahead.
Thank you, Robert. I'm now going to introduce our speaker for the day, which is Dr. Jeffrey Long, MD. And Dr. Jeffrey Long is a very special person because, as Robert, I think, mentioned, we are inducting him into the Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor today. Our SAI Circle of Honor is like a Hall of Fame. And this is where we acknowledge people that we feel have been groundbreakers and pioneers in the field of STEs in the last 100 years. It's not easy being a groundbreaker, so we want to acknowledge people who have made that effort. So today, it is my honor and my privilege to honor Dr. Jeffrey Long, MD, who is being inducted into the Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor for his groundbreaking work relating to near-death experiences. We do also plan to have an in-person induction ceremony at our first person-to-person conference, but with COVID, we have no idea when that can be possible. So instead, we are honoring people at our events when they speak. And today I'd like to do a tribute to Dr. Jeffrey Long. So Dr. Jeffrey Long, MD, who's going to be our speaker today, is a radiation oncology physician who practices in Houma, Louisiana. He is the founder of NDERF, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, which he founded in 1998. Dr. Long has investigated over 4,000 near-death experiences, which is by far the largest number of near-death experiences ever scientifically studied by one person, one researcher. Millions of people around the world have seen Dr. Long discuss his research on such shows as the NBC Today Show, the Dr. Oz Show, National Geographic, History Channel, and other shows. And the results of his previous research have been published in his New York Times best-selling, groundbreaking book, Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of the Near-Death Experience. Dr. Long is also the founder of ADCRF, the After Death Communications Research Foundation, and the OBERF, the Out of Body Experience Research Foundation. So I'd like all of you today to join me for a minute to congratulate Dr. Jeffrey Long for his induction into the Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor. Congratulations, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That's a great honor and I greatly appreciate it. So thank you all. Great honor, very much appreciated, and thank you all very much.
So go ahead, Jeffrey.
Oh, well, it's certainly an honor. I've known Yvonne for, of course, many, many years. It's really a pleasure to talk about a lot of these things, physician to physician. You know, I certainly respect Yvonne and all the other people involved in this organization's efforts to bring forward spiritually transformative experiences, which includes near-death experiences. I feel like we're kindred spirits. I feel like we all sort of share that same journey, that same goal to help understand better near-death experiences, spiritually transformative experiences, and share that with the world. And I think that's certainly very important. And again, I'm very honored to be a part of this organization and our shared effort. And certainly thanks to Tamara, who's the co-sponsor of this organization, this talk today here. Again, kindred spirit and helping us all to learn about these important experiences and share their profound message of hope and inspiration with the world. Thanks again.
So it's your time. Go ahead with your talk, please. Yes.
All right. Then let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, well, I'm going to be talking about the summary of my research experience. This will be oriented for the public, so we're not going to get too technical here. As Yvonne mentioned, I founded the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation in 1998, and it changed my life. I published 2 books. You don't really have to go buy them, folks. I'll share all the important information here today, but Evidence of the Afterlife, The Science of Near-Death Experiences, and then my more recent, God in the Afterlife, with the groundbreaking new evidence for near-death experiences, and that went into some of the deeper, if you will, spiritual messages about near-death experience, which we'll get into in just a little bit. So when I published my book, Evidence of the Afterlife, over a decade ago, immediately was life-changing. I mean, here I am in a small town in Louisiana, and bam, it suddenly became a New York Times bestseller. I really didn't realize if that was a big deal or not until it happened, and realized suddenly it was. So we were flooded at work with people calling, interviews. I'd do often 3 a day for a prolonged period of time. And so it was kind of a shock, and really all of a sudden went from just sort of doing my research in the background to suddenly sharing it with the world very vividly. And when I say sharing it with the world, I really mean that. I've been on the NBC Today Show 3 times. The O'Reilly factor, that was a bigger deal until he got in trouble. Just interestingly, when I was to be interviewed for the O'Reilly Factor, they had up on the screen, they had videos of the person who was interviewing right before me, and it was a 4-star general. They were just O'Reilly was just ripping him apart. I felt like I was dead, but he liked my book, thank goodness. So it turned out good. Dr. Osho a couple times, and just a lot of other national TV and certainly national radio venues and for all around the world. It really changed my life locally. Houma, Louisiana, if you've never heard of it, join the club. It's a town of now a little under 30,000 in the southern part of Louisiana. It's west of New Orleans, and interestingly, even a little bit south. We're near the Gulf of Mexico. So all through my hometown here, we were talking to churches, hospice groups, Rotary, TV, newspapers. I think I really talked to just about every community group in the whole area. So it's really been a journey of that I've enjoyed sharing this both in large audiences, small audiences, and I've loved it every minute of it. I actually like the smaller audiences because we can get down and answer questions, and that's some of the most valuable part, I think, of this. And by the way, speaking of answering questions, I'm going to be sure to leave plenty of time at the end of this presentation for people to ask any and all questions you want. So be sure to make a note, mental, or write down your questions, and we'll certainly want to make time to talk about them. So let's talk about what a near-death experience is. Well, at least for the purposes of my research, there are different views of near-death experiences among different near-death experience researchers. But from 1998 forward, I took a fairly straightforward view that you really, to have a near-death experience, you needed to be so near death that you were typically unconscious or clinically dead with absent heartbeat, absent respiration. These people at that time, by definition of being unconscious, shouldn't be having any lucid organized experience at all, and yet they do. That's the experience part of a near-death experience. At this time, they have what we researchers have noted a very consistent pattern of elements typically occurring in a very similar manner. Now, I want to emphasize, out of the thousands of near-death experiences we studied, no two near-death experiences are the same. They certainly have a common pattern of elements, but no two near-death experiences, as far as I'm aware of, that have ever been reported are exactly identical. Let's talk a little bit about those consistent pattern of elements. Typically and commonly, a very first thing that happens in a near-death experience is that so-called out-of-body experience. They are suddenly, boom, unconscious from whatever accident or illness or traumatic event has put them near death. At that time, they often have what's called an out-of-body experience. That means their consciousness separates from the body, typically going above their body, and from the vantage point over their physical body, they can see and often hear ongoing earthly events. They also may have heightened senses. At this point in time, one of the most common things described in near-death experiences is typically an extremely positive emotions, more so than they've ever had in their life. Two of the most common words used in near-death experiences are peace and love, and they feel this intensely. A distinct minority of experiences, however, do contain frightening sensations that go along with this too. With regard to senses, they can, during the near-death experience, they may be able to see in a way that is literally unearthly. It's not unusual to have near-death experiencers describe what's called 360-degree vision, for example. They can simultaneously see in front of them, back of them, right, left, up and down, and in a way that we simply can't imagine going through our earthly life with our pie-shaped earthly vision. They may also have a strong sense of communication that's, if you will, telepathic. I mean, they have a sense of communicating with people during the near-death experience in a way that's literally unearthly. Commonly described in near-death experiences is they may pass into or through a tunnel that's variably described, but essentially never claustrophobic. At the end of the tunnel, they may encounter a mystical or brilliant light, again, which they'll typically say is something like they never knew on Earth. When they're on that, if you will, afterlife realm, other side, heavenly realm, it's been called different things, but when they're in an environment that's distinctly unearthly, that's where things get real interesting. They may encounter either mystical beings, typically not frightening, often very loving, described as spiritual beings, often described as light. They may encounter deceased relatives. Even if the person they knew in their earthly life died of a disfiguring or chronic illness, they essentially always appear in picture perfect health there. And these are typical, even if the earthly relationship was strained, virtually all the time, these are joyous reunions with the people that they knew and loved and lost. Very heartwarming to hear these encounters described during near-death experiences. Almost always in a near-death experience is a sense of alteration of space or time. Virtually every person having a near-death experience states that either time does not exist or time is radically slow. They may be unconscious for a period of, say, minutes, and yet during that time, they may have a sense of interaction with that unearthly realm of the near-death experience that would be, if they'd say, an earth time in hours. So in this unearthly realm, time doesn't seem to be anything like it is here. And spatial relations are different too. In fact, they can often describe literally moving even over what would seemingly be large geographic areas on Earth almost instantaneously. Now, a life review is interesting. Some near-death experiencers describe seeing a portion or all of their prior life, which is absolutely fascinating when you think that they're unconscious, often for a few minutes, usually not more than 20 or 30 minutes. And yet during that time of unconsciousness, they're able to perceive at times their entire prior life. Often is described as flashing on a screen like a movie. In some types of life review, they actually are not only seeing their prior life, but they're actually seeing how other people that they interacted with felt. In other words, they can literally feel what the other person that they're interacting with felt like, which is, and sometimes that's very surprising, but again, part of the how dramatic these near-death experiences can be. As we've said, they can encounter unworldly, often called heavenly realms. In this realm, there may be, of course, we talked about deceased loved ones, other beings. There may be buildings, typically beautiful beyond anything on Earth. I'm always love hearing descriptions from near-death experiencers about plants they encounter, flowers that are colors that are so beautiful that they have no earthly correlate. They're undescribable from any of their prior earthly life. Same thing with music. They may encounter music that is so beautiful it literally has no correlate here in this earthly life. And again, at this time, even though their precipitating event was a life-threatening event, a literal close brush with death, at this time, there's almost never feeling any of the pain or the misery of that life-threatening event that precipitated the near-death experience. They can encounter or learn special knowledge. There's a term, universal knowledge, to describe what near-death experiences may say, where they felt they learned everything, knew everything all at once, all about the universe. They can't retain it, unfortunately, when they get back into their physical body. In fact, one near-death experiencer said, it's like trying to put an ocean of knowledge into that little teacup that's the human brain. So unfortunately, they're not bringing back a lot of insights from that universal knowledge that they may have during their near-death experience. Now, often in a near-death experience, they're going down a path and may encounter a barrier, a stream, a bridge, a fence. But if there's other beings with them and it's getting near the end of the near-death experience, there may be a discussion about whether to return to their earthly life or not. Remarkably, at this time, even though for the person having the near-death experience, everything they knew about their life up to that time was their earthly life, their friends, family, loved ones, everything they knew and loved about Earth was all they had until their near-death experience. And yet, in spite of all that, when they reach the boundary and there's that discussion with spiritual beings, there's often a offer made to them. They can return to their earthly life or they can stay in that unearthly or heavenly realm. Interestingly, the great majority of near-death experiencers very strongly want to stay in that unearthly heavenly realm and be permanently separated from their earthly life. They'll often argue it very, very forcefully. There's often a fascinating dialogue back and forth. Ultimately, a decision is made, obviously, for them to come back to their earthly life to allow them to share their near-death experience. Most common reason people leave that heavenly realm to come back to Earth is for relationships, typically children or other loved ones in their life. Now, the majority of the time, they simply seem to be sent back to earthly life involuntarily. So that's the most common pattern. And so once they are either voluntary or involuntarily returned to their earthly body or the near-death experience just ends, boom, after they recover from that close brush with death, they then have a near-death experience that they can share with the world if they so want to. So that's a fairly long-winded discussion about the elements of a near-death experience. And I think you can already see why we're all fascinated by near-death experiences. There's so many remarkable, interesting aspects to them. Well, what about me? I first heard about near-death experience when I was doing my residency training decades ago at this point. And I was going through a medical journal. This was back before they had all the medical journals online. We actually had big old thick journals. You can see that, about yay thick. And I was going through the New England Journal of Medical, one of the very prominent medical journals, looking for my cancer-related article that was pertinent to my medical specialty I was studying for, which is radiation oncology, which is the use of radiation to treat cancer. Quite by accident, as I was flipping through that tome, I found an article that had in the title near-death experience. I'd never heard about it before. It was written by near-death experience researcher, Dr. Michael Sabom. And as I read this, I was astounded. Here, for the first time in my life, I was reading about people having near-death experiences while they were unconscious or dead. Everything I knew from my medical training said that's impossible. You can't have a conscious experience when you're basically dead like that. And yet here was Dr. Sabom's description about it. I broke off from looking for that cancer-related article and looked up some of the references and was fascinated. Again, this was in the very early 1980s, and I remember thinking prophetically, well, why aren't more people doing research in this fascinating topic? So it was about a year later, I was with a college friend and his wife, and we were hanging out at a restaurant. And over the course of dinner conversation, the wife of my friend mentioned that she had severe medical allergies, so severe, in fact, that she actually coded while she was having an operation. But she said it in a very funny way. And my instincts as a physician was, there's got to be more to the story here. So I prepared to ask what should have been the stupidest question of my life. And a lot hung in the balance on that. It would be ludicrous to ask her if she had a lucid experience while she was under general anesthesia and coded. That made no sense. But after about 30 seconds, my curiosity got the better of me. And I said, well, gee, did anything happen to you when you coded on that operating table while you're under general anesthesia? And she had, why, yes. And went ahead and told me the first near-death experience I heard in my life. Now, she and her husband had never heard of near-death experiences, and they didn't understand this. So I said, well, gee, I read about that a year or two ago. I think you had one of these near-death experiences. And immediately I said, if this stuff really happens, if near-death experiences are for real, that changes my view of the universe. So after I got out of residency, I was a bit of a computer geek. So if the very primitive systems we had back then, is in, only the older ones there remember dial-up modems and that kind of stuff, and etc. And sometimes it would take a long time to get on. But I went ahead and set up that website, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, NDERF.org. Immediately from its inception and up till the current time, it's really a public service. We're not out there to sell things or make money from it. We really want to carry forward its main goal, which is to have people share their near-death experiences, fill out a very detailed survey, and then share those with the rest of the world. And we share them back on the website anonymously, as long as people give us permission at the time they share their experience, which way over 95% of the people do. So we now have thousands of the near-death experiences on the website posted. And there's one thing that I absolutely appreciated very early in my adventure of studying near-death experience back when we started this in 1998, was that basic scientific principle: that which is real is consistently observed. And over throughout the thousands of near-death experiences that were to come in, I was astounded at how remarkably consistent so much there is about near-death experiences, their elements and things that go on are consistently observed, not only in my NDERF or website, but with what we're seeing among all the other researchers too. There's remarkable consistency in what's been reported and described, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. By the way, before we go too far afield here, a huge thanks to my wife, Jody. She is a licensed attorney, and yet she devotes her entire full-time job, and it's actually closer to 1.5 times FTE or full-time equivalent, working on the website. She's now the webmaster, and there's no way I could do this without having Jody mind the web shop and the huge number of emails and communications we get, and work with the volunteer translators. We have the website now posted in over 30 different languages, including the survey that's associated with the website. And Jody actually gets these experiences from all around the world, literally, and works with human translators. And over the several decades we've done this, we've actually worked with hundreds of volunteer human translators to translate these experiences. So Near-Death Experience Research Foundation is truly an international outreach with, and I'll use the abbreviation NDE, published in over 30 different languages. So who has a near-death experience? Well, just about anyone can. A Gallup poll published back in the early 1980s estimated that perhaps about 5% of adults in America had a prior history of a near-death experience, and that's been corroborated by several other studies. So they're really not rare. A lot of people have had them, literally around the world, millions. Now, interestingly, we cannot predict at the time of a close brush with death who will or will not have a near-death experience or what the content of the near-death experience will be. I actually co-authored a book chapter, Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, reviewing all prior literature we had at that time, and our conclusion is we really can't predict that. Now, interestingly, near-death experiences can happen to children and adults. They happen to physicians and scientists, clergy, religious. NDEs, interestingly, happen to atheists. And they can happen to people who have never heard of near-death experiences in their life and don't believe anything like that is even possible. Bottom line is anyone can have a near-death experience. At the time of a close brush with death, around 10 to 20% of people will have a near-death experience. Again, 80 or 90% of people don't have a near-death experience. So that's one of the real interesting research questions ongoing in NDE research now. Oh, here we go. This is a fake near-death kit. This is not how we do our research. This is a light bulb at the end of a tunnel, and this person is not seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. So we'll have to emphasize that's not how we really do it, folks. Sometimes I talk to skeptics, so we have to remind them that's not really what we do. But what to emphasize as we go forward, the studies that I'm going to be talking about, there's a huge foundation of other good near-death experience researchers, and we certainly have several of them with us here today in this talk. There's literally been hundreds of prior scholarly articles in the leading medical and scientific journals. And when I talk about near-death experiences here, I want to emphasize that the great majority of what I'm presenting has actually been corroborated by other major study findings with prior scholarly research, often with smaller studies, but this isn't a unique finding by the study I'm presenting here by any means. There's a lot of good folks doing some very good research on this. So what's the next thing that we're going to get into is numbered 1 through 9. And what this is the 9 lines of evidence I presented in my first book, Evidence of the Afterlife. Well, and these are all lines of evidence pointing to the reality of a near-death experience and its consistent message that there is life after death. So here's what we talked about. And number 1, crystal clear consciousness. Now, following a cardiac arrest or your heart stops beating, which is a very common precipitating event in near-death experiences, of course, once the heart stops beating, blood stops flowing to the brain immediately. The EEG is an electroencephalogram, and that goes absolutely flat after 10 to 20 seconds. This measure of brain electrical activity does not detect brain activity that quickly after a complete cardiac arrest. It should be impossible for anybody to come back with any conscious experience at that time. And yet, in my survey of people that had near-death experiences, and this was over 600, nearly 3/4 said that they had actually more consciousness and alertness than normal during their near-death experience. Only 20%, about 1 in 5, said that their consciousness during the NDE was the same as their earthly life consciousness. And only 5% said that they had less consciousness and alertness. Now that is astounding. Sometimes I almost have to pinch myself and remind me, hey, they're unconscious or clinically dead when they're having that degree of lucidity, and that's amazing. The other interesting thing about consciousness during near-death experiences is that they're remembered years to decades later verbatim. We've had some good studies where people check the near-death experience account many, many years later and find that they seem to be relayed word for word the same. And another researcher, well known in the field, Dr. Bruce Grayson, actually did a study where he repeated a research scale for near-death experience and found that near-death experiences didn't seem to be embellished or forgotten even well over a decade after they occurred. So that's really interesting that near-death experiences are remembered with that degree of lucidity and long-term stable remembrance, which you don't see in virtually any other time of alterated consciousness. And number two, very importantly, is what we call realistic out-of-body observations. In my study, about 45% of near-death experiences described ongoing earthly events with their consciousness above. The other 55% would immediately go into these, if you will, unearthly realms, or in a realm that wasn't really an observation of earthly events. So what you would reasonably ask is what they're seeing with their consciousness above their body, is it real? Well, they've had some very good studies on this. One prospective study by both Sabom and Dr. Sartori looked into this, and their conclusion from their study was, yes, what they're seeing in that out-of-body state seems to be real. Dr. Jan Holden reviewed the literature, and that was all prior reported out-of-body observations up to the time of her study, and found that 92% of these out-of-body observations during the near-death experience were without any apparent inaccuracy. In my study, I found 287 people that had these out-of-body observations, and reading them carefully, 97.6% of the time, what they were seeing seemed to be without any apparent inaccuracy. And interestingly, this includes these out-of-body observations far from the physical body. For example, just as one example out of scores that we had a person who coded in the operating room. Consciousness went up. They saw the frantic efforts at their own resuscitation. Their consciousness left the operating room, went to the hospital cafeteria, where their family was sitting there at the table, eating, completely unaware of this crisis in the operating room. When he recovered, he was able to explain verbatim to the family members exactly what they were saying and what was going on at that table with complete accuracy. We actually had this guy on television and presented that, but again, that's not really rare. As I said, we have scores of that, and I can assure you, being that accurate in your observations with no discernible error, that kind of observation far from the physical body is absolutely medically inexplicable. There's no physical brain function that can even possibly explain that. Another fascinating aspect of near-death experiences are near-death experiences can occur in the blind. I interviewed Vicki. Unfortunately, she passed away, but she was basically born totally blind. She was born at a time very premature, put in an oxygen tent, which they did in the 1950s, before they realized that that would destroy the retina, the back of the eye responsible for visualization. So in interviewing Vicki, she described vision during her near-death experience. She was in a bad car wreck, and for the skeptics, no, she wasn't driving. She's blind. So she was being driven home. She was a singer in a bar, and unfortunately, the patron was a little overserved. And so bad car wreck. And the first time she had vision was when she was over her body in the emergency room. And she was initially frightened because she wasn't familiar with vision, but went on to describe what I previously mentioned, 360-degree vision, life review, a stunningly detailed near-death experience with vision. In fact, when I interviewed Vicki, she found it hard to believe that vision was restricted to that pie-shaped visual field because her total life experience was 360-degree vision and during her near-death experience. Here's just an example of a NDE in the blind. This was shared with our Ender. Marta is a 5-year-old girl, and she had this experience. So parents, keep your blind young children away from water. This is a sobering reminder of that. From Marta's own words, I slowly breathed in the water and immediately lost consciousness. A beautiful woman dressed in bright white light pulled me out and, looking into my eyes, asked me what I wanted. I was completely satisfied and could think of nothing until it occurred to me to take a trip around the lake. I did so and saw a detail I would have never seen in real life. I could go anywhere, even to the tops of trees, by simply intending to do so. I was legally blind, and for the first time saw leaves on trees, birds' feathers, birds' eyes, details on telephone poles and in people's backyard that were far more acute than 20/20 vision. Notice how what we would consider mundane details, telephone poles, bird feathers, are dramatic if you're legally blind and this is the first time in your life you're seeing them. We actually now have a small series of near-death experiences that occurred at the time the person was either profoundly visually impaired or legally blind. Now, here's another one. You'll mention my example, my first near-death experience that occurred during general anesthesia. Well, when you're under adequate general anesthesia, consciousness, lucid, organized consciousness, should be absolutely impossible. And that's especially when your heart stops while you're under general anesthesia. It should be, if you will, doubly impossible to have any conscious remembrance. But it happens. In my Evidence of the Afterlife book, I studied 23 near-death experiences that clearly occurred under general anesthesia. They absolutely do occur, and they're typical near-death experiences. In my questionnaire, I had 33 questions devoted to what occurs during the near-death experience, the elements. In that comparison of people that had their near-death experience under general anesthesia to near-death experiences occurring under all other people that had a near-death experience that were the most detailed, believe an afterlife definitely exists. And if you looked at what they felt before their experience, you can see the radical shift of what a profoundly detailed experience can do in terms of you believing that an afterlife definitely exists. That is remarkable if you look through that data, which won't go into too much detail. But again, suffice it to say, a dramatic increased belief in an afterlife if you have a near-death experience, no matter how detailed it is, but especially for the more detailed near-death experiences. And again, the same kind of data, I'll say these are too many numbers, so we'll go through it quick here. But once again, point being, the fear of death before your experience, geez, close to 32% greatly feared death. And at the current time, only about 3% fear death. So again, dramatic reduction in the fear of death associated with the near-death experience. Well, how about this one? Again, from our most recent survey, what about your level of compassion toward other people? For those being greatly compassionate toward others, 23%. And look at what happens after their near-death experience at the current time when they share it, 77% greatly compassionate toward others. So absolutely, near-death experiences seems to be associated with a remarkable change in values in that direction. And of course, here's another one, meaning, belief in meaning and purpose, significance of our earthly lives. Before their near-death experience, only about 27.5% thought their life was meaningful and significant. And wow, look at that. At the current time, after their near-death experience, when they share it, 80%. So again, remarkable correlation with the near-death experience with a dramatically increased belief in our earthly life being meaningful and significant. So again, just a little bit of final thoughts, and these are straight from what near-death experiencers have shared. We are all part of the light. Each soul is a part of the whole or God. Another near-death experiencer shared, I can't describe how this felt. I was awed, struck dumb, amazed, overwhelmed. But none of this really says what a profound experience this was. God was totally, absolutely beyond anything I had ever imagined. Beyond language, beyond thought, utterly beyond, but at the same time, near, right there in front of me, and mysteriously accessible. So this is a quote from my book. Many people ask, where is God? And it's sometimes in their life, it's about everybody's asked that. Well, after studying near-death experiences, I believe they suggest the answer is literally, God is everywhere. So again, from a near-death experiencer, I came to understand that life is an opportunity for us to express and experience love. Oddly enough, that includes those times when life turns on us. Doesn't that happen to all of us? All that happens to us happens for a reason, and that reason is learning. Another near-death experiencer, quite succinctly, life's meaning or purpose is love. Clear and simple, love. So again, from my book, the evidence from near-death experiences, profoundly strong evidence, is that God loves all of us. Again and again, one reads in NDE accounts how God loves us regardless of who we are, what we look like, how young or old we are, or what our shortcomings may be. We are loved by God for exactly who we are and what we are. And folks, I can assure you, when I came to that understanding through my research, I found that profoundly reassuring and inspirational. Well, thoughts for future near-death experience research, and I hope we hear from some of the other prominent NDE researchers with us today. I think there's really sort of basically two directions of NDE research. The one that still needs to address the skeptics. Are NDEs real? You still need to look over skeptic arguments, review them, see if there's any way to deal with them. I can tell you from overwhelming evidence, I think the answer is yes, NDEs are real and medically inexplicable. So given that foundation of accepting near-death experience reality, if we accept that premise, well, then what can we learn from NDEs? Well, good gosh, you've seen some pretty good examples here today. Spiritual understandings that could literally unite diverse religions. We're all one and together in this, in a way I had no idea existed until I started studying NDE. We're all one. We have an afterlife. God is with all of us. Love is the most important force in the earth and universe. There's a mystical unity that exists with all of us, in which each other and over near-death experiences, our earthly lives, however difficult, are profoundly meaningful and purposeful, even though at times that's very difficult to understand. So the bottom line is, with converging lines of evidence, there's reality of near-death experiences. I think it's very well established, along with their consistent message of an afterlife, a wonderful afterlife for all of us. This is based on the strength of multiple lines of evidence. This is based on skeptics for decades trying to explain near-death experience and failing. And of course, this has enormous implications for science, religious, and frankly, for each and every person listening to this today. So all of this is a profound message of hope and inspiration. Bottom line, death is not the end, but the beginning. There really is a wonderful afterlife, and that's for each and every one of us. And I think all of that's perhaps the most powerful and positive message, that being from near-death experiences, that is conceivable. And that's for all of us. So it's exciting to be doing this type of near-death experience research. I want to thank you very much. And as promised, I wanted to leave plenty of times for questions here and comments. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jeffrey. If you could stop your screen sharing right now, and then Linda will take over the question and answer period.
That's great. Before we get into those questions, I know there's people still typing on the keyboard. I just want to give you an idea of the scope of the presentation today. United Kingdom, France, multiple states throughout the United States, Canada, Indiana, England, Sweden, California. Holland. Yeah. So we've got a lot of coverage today. And a lot of comments.
I left a lot of time. There's usually a lot of questions, but I share it. And I'm ready.
And numerous people also noted their congratulations for you being added to our Circle of Honor, and we're so glad to have you in that role.
Thank you very much again.
So, all right, NDERF. Just a comment from somebody that was on your website many, many years ago. His name is Rudy, and he said, I provided my NDE on NDERF back when the site first began. Further comment was Anita Morjani also put her NDE up way back then. So you've been around for some time, and their stories have been open to the public.
I really feel it an honor and a privilege to have a website which served as a stepping stone for people to share their NDE with the world, often feeling more empowered and able to share it with other people. And it's really been inspiring to help people along that path.
And that's good. And we're finding various ways to use the media, and that this entire presentation will be recorded and available on our website. And if you have the computer capacity to save your chat, you can read the comments later on. And we can answer specific questions if we should miss one right now. So somebody was asking about the recording, and we clarified that. So I'm gonna go to Dave. Dave asked, when you were mentioning the music, that it sounded better. Visuals are more meaningful. All this sounds like the effects of LSD. Is the same part of the brain perhaps in play?
Okay, let me address LSD or other psychotropic, or if you will, brain-acting drugs. Very recently, there's an increasing buzz in other media sources that these illicit substances may reproduce the near-death experiences. You can find out for yourself. Here's how you do that. Go to the website erowid.org. This is a website devoted to people sharing illicit drug experiences by the thousands. People there, in their own words, type up illicit drug experiences divided up, categorized by type of illicit experience. You can go read for yourself LSD experiences, DMT experiences, you name it, they've got it up there. They an amazing array of psychotropic drug experiences. I've done that, and I can assure you, after studying near-death experiences and the gripping reality and the deeper messages of them all, I found it actually gross to read these hallucinatory, often frightening experiences, experiences that if you read any significant number of LSD experiences and any significant number of near-death experiences, the dramatic difference between what occurs during these experiences should be evident to anybody that wants to go explore that on their own.
Sounds like a great resource. Can you spell that out again?
Yeah, and that's it's Erowid, EROWID.org. An absolutely astounding database of first-person experiences of illicit drug experiences shared by the people that actually had them. If you really think NDE is like any name the illicit psychotropic drug, go read the experiences straight from the people that had them, and you can decide for yourself. I did, and I can assure you there's nothing at all like near-death experiences with what occurs during a typical illicit drug use. Now, by the way, we've also had that with our website, NDERF. People over the years have shared illicit drug experiences that they thought were somewhat related to near-death experiences. In general, it's fairly obvious that they're not like near-death experiences. They're more often hallucinatory. They tend to skip around like dreams. There's a much higher probability that they'll be frightening, and much lower probability that they'll result in those after effects, significant long-term positive changes, as is almost universally seen with near-death experiences.
Okay. Another question from Sarah. Sarah states, I've heard that a theme that runs through NDEs is that the most important thing we can do on earth is to love everyone, even those who would do us harm. Does your body of research and the knowledge support this thought?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. In fact, that's a good question. In our most recent survey, we very directly asked, did you receive or become aware of, I guess that's the wording, of any concepts of love during emphasized your experience? And a remarkably high percentage of people answer yes. And then in the text box, go on to explain during their near-death experience the importance of love that they encountered. The awareness that literally love seems to rule the universe, that God is love, that love is literally, if you will, our connection with the afterlife, that love is absolutely the most important thing, one of the most important things that we ought to be thinking about in our earthly life. And that is certainly reflected in the near-death experiencers' after effects. That's why they become more compassionate. That's why they want to reach out to other people more lovingly, because they've learned that during their near-death experience about how profoundly important it is. Now, that's easy to say, to reach out and live your earthly life lovingly. That's easy to say. The difficulty is to do it. And obviously, as we all know from living our earthly life, that can be difficult. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, we shouldn't be thinking about it, and that shouldn't be our goal, to live lovingly in our earthly life.
Thank you. You did mention the various conditions under which somebody might have an NDE, and Veronica just shared with everybody the NDE she had was related to cancer radiation treatment. Hope it wasn't anything you were involved with, but she apparently is here to stay with us. Do have a question from CJ.
I've got to jump in. As a radiation oncologist that treats patients with cancer, I'm not aware of radiation itself. You don't get a life-threatening event during radiation therapy. Under extremely rare, vanishingly close to 0% probability, there can be life-threatening events as a result of any cancer treatment, including radiation therapy. So I'm very sorry to hear that apparently happened and led to a life-threatening event and a near-death experience. But I'm glad she's obviously recovered and is part of us here today. Radiation therapy and all the major cancer treatment modalities today are, we all work very, very carefully to make sure that they're as safe as possible and as effective as possible.
Okay. Got CJ asking a question. When those who are near death see people who have died in the room with them, medical professionals have told me that it is an hallucination. It seems to me that it is not an hallucination, and that doctors in other cultures have told me that they are taught to see these encounters as real. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, we talked briefly about encountering deceased loved ones or other people, much more likely to occur in an unearthly realm or heavenly realm, if you will. But the people that are described in near-death experiences, again, very striking their consistency. Picture perfect health, communication essentially always telepathic, non-physical, if you will. And you know, so we see that. And certainly there's some differences in cultural, in medical healthcare systems around the world. I think in America, in the Western world, I think there's more and more openness by healthcare professionals about these kind of experiences, including people seeing deceased people around them, or especially as part of near-death experiences. That was not the case 20 or 30 years ago, where near-death experience was much less known. But in this day and age, if someone has a near-death experience and is clearly a near-death experience, and they're misdiagnosed as some psychiatric abnormality, that is, in my opinion, medical malpractice. Near-death experiences are a very clear, separate phenomenon from hallucinations and from other significant alterations of human consciousness, pathological.
Okay, thank you. Discussing some of the elements of an NDE, Tamara shared that she heard angelic music and sound colors in heaven, and we're beyond our earthly color spectrum. And as you think about synesthesia, is there an account maybe you can share with us of somebody else that had a crossing of the senses during their NDE?
Yeah, that's a great question. Synesthesia, they're all great questions actually, but synesthesia is sort of a blending of sensations. In other words, as was described there, there's color or some visual component associated with something auditory, what they're hearing. It's sort of like the music is so beautiful, it seems to have beautiful colors associated with it. Synesthesia and near-death experiences, at least in our database, I've kept my eyes out for it because they're so dramatic, but they seem to be very, very rare. I have just a very few number of near-death experiences describing that, but they're exactly like that. They absolutely can occur during a near-death experience, and it seems to be that heightened consciousness, heightened awareness occurring during near-death experiences, and just yet one of the other lines of evidence that consciousness, awareness, what occurs during a near-death experience is not only unearthly, but certainly something that would be radically unexpected from all of your prior life. I mean, virtually nobody experiences synesthesia during their earthly life. So when you experience that during near-death experience, that's unexpected and dramatic, and you know, certainly just one more line of evidence of the unearthly consciousness people have.
Thank you. Gurm commented that he'd been with two people who had near deathbed visions, and that he's got no reason to doubt that what they were seeing. And I was wondering what your insight is on the synchronicity and the commonality between NDE elements and what we're hearing at deathbed visions.
Yeah, that's great. If anyone wants to look up some of these so-called deathbed visions, go to our website, oberf.org, and then search for DBV as part. We have about, it's probably up to 40 or 50 deathbed visions listed there, and they're very dramatic. They occur leading up to the time of death. People that are dying may often be aware of deceased loved ones, spiritual beings. They may hear that beautiful, unearthly music. It seems to be profoundly reassuring. And on rare occasions, there can be a shared, basically, deathbed vision or death experience where the person who's dying at the time of death, there may be a shared experience with other people with them that can turn into something near or even very similar to a near-death experience in terms of its content. So there's no doubt that those are real experiences. They've been described by many researchers. I think it's part of the whole spectrum of near-death experiences. I mean, it's part of those, you know, one more piece of the puzzle that helps us know these types of, if you will, for lack of a better word, spiritual experiences aren't just near-death experiences. but there are certainly other types of things that can occur, other types of experiences that are in that same umbrella of spiritual experiences, and that's deathbed visions. By the way, if you know anybody in hospice, just ask anybody who's a hospice worker about deathbed visions, and you'd better sit down because you're going to hear a long talk, typically about a lot of deathbed visions they're aware of. So again, they're fairly common.
Okay, I'm jumping over a couple of comments, going straight to Carla's question. Just wondering about other species / living beings. I know a dog or a whale can't share their experience as we don't speak the same language. However, this other realm, communications made by thoughts. Have you ever had a different ride that expressed their experience differently with regards of communication with other living beings?
Yeah, well, again, in near-death experiences, that sort of love connection seems to be what drives it. So we have quite a good caseload of people during their near-death experience that encountered, as I mentioned earlier, deceased pets. And as with deceased humans, they're all essentially always picture perfect health. They're joyous reunions. They don't really interact or communicate like you would human to human. When they encounter, that's a good question. When they've encountered deceased pets, I think the great majority of the time, at least, the relationship that they had on Earth seems to be there. The dog is a dog, and it's sort of a continuation in an idyllic environment, an unearthly realm of that same type of relationship.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Again, we have an experiencer providing input. He said, this is from Rudy. A lady in a beautiful dress and red shoes came out to me in a flooded cornfield. As I returned back to my body and put a blanket over me, I was going into shock. I wonder if the closing of an NDE does help bring us physical comfort once we get back in the body.
That's a good question. And I've never had a near-death experience personally. So, again, we can always learn from near-death experiencers. But in fact, I would emphasize what we don't know about near-death experience far outweighs what we do know. So it's always good for people to raise those questions, to keep thinking about things we haven't thought about. And as time goes on and people share their near-death experiences, and as we learn from them, I hope in the future we'll know a lot more than we do today. And it's the more we learn, the more exciting it gets.
True. Okay, another question. This one's from Marianne. Is there information available on the amount of time that the patient stays seemingly unconscious before coming back into the body or becoming conscious to others again?
Yeah, that's interesting. So if I understand the question, is there a correlation of either the probability of a near-death experience occurring or its content based on the duration or period of unconsciousness? I don't believe that. I'm not aware of that. It'd be interesting to see if any of the other researchers are aware of that. I do know one thing, that one study found that actually the closer you are to death, the more you are close to that permanent irreversible death, the more likely you are to have a near-death experience. But I've been interested in this too. Even seemingly very brief periods of unconsciousness, sometimes even seeming in the order of magnitude of seconds, can still result in very detailed near-death experiences. So it would be interesting to see if you'd have to really look carefully at a large number of near-death experiences to study that, and I just haven't looked at that.
Okay. And we have a question from Amy. Some people who've had NDEs report having healing abilities. Are some of these of the laying on of hands type of energy healing? What have you learned about this effect? And has anyone studied that particular effect, after effect?
Yeah, good question. So question about healing as an after effect following a near-death experience. As a physician, I'm very cautious about that. I've certainly seen some near-death experiences that had healing occurring afterwards, which from best I could tell as a physician was absolutely medically inexplicable. So on rare occasions, I see that during near-death experiences, not very often. But as far as healing abilities as an after effect, many people have described that. As a physician, I'm fascinated about that. it just hasn't been studied well enough that I think we can really say a whole lot about that. That's a huge area that would be very important to investigate. Hands-on healing, energy healing, or the not unusual belief of people after a near-death experience that they can heal. Goodness gracious, folks, I treat people with cancer. I'll take anything that can help. I do know that, however, that in my medical research, people have looked at what is the probability of somebody with very well documented advanced metastatic cancer having an inexplicable healing, regression of their cancer, or even cure. And it's in the order of magnitude of about 1 in 80,000 to 1 in 100,000. So at least in my area in cancer, any kind of special healing is very obviously very, very rare. But cancer may not be the best type of physical ailment that responds to hands-on healing. It's just something that really cries out for more investigation. It may be effective in other ailments, and that's really important. A lot of people really do believe they have healing abilities. It needs to be studied better.
True. Early in your presentation, you mentioned Michael Sabom, and he was a cardiologist. I just want to bring this to everybody's attention. And he was a cardiologist that worked at a Veterans Affairs hospital. So a lot of his patients and a lot of his research reflected on those stories. I bring that up because the next question deals specifically with cardiac arrest. Mm-hmm. There was a discussion in an NDE group on Facebook of only seeing the blackness, or they mentioned they don't remember and woke up with CPR. Some were discussing why some have an experience and some don't. Seems many cardiac arrest, I'm going to say patients, don't remember anything except waking up to CPR. And we do have another Circle of Honor member, Pim Von Lommel, who's with us today. And it's just odd that we've got all these referrals going back to cardiologists today. You got the question.
Well, I would refer it to Dr. Von Lommel, who's a cardiologist, and I'm a radiation oncologist. So he would be in a much better position to address that. And Pim, jump in if I don't have this right. But typically during CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, you don't wake up during CPR. That's very rare, as I understand it. Typically, with CPR, you're barely getting enough blood flow through the body to keep your organs alive. Almost never enough blood flow to have lucid organized consciousness like you do before that cardiac arrest. And typically after CPR, there's an amnesic or loss of memory period, typically for several hours. So I would point that out. So it makes it all the more dramatic that people are having remembrances, lucid organized remembrances, when their brain is so shut down and so very, very close to death, very, very much non-functioning by every measurement. I mean, when you're doing, again, Pim can say a lot more about this, but geez, when you're doing CPR, you can get out that old flashlight and shine it in their eyes, and you typically don't see it move. They're literally hypo-functioning in the brain down to the brainstem level, and that you can document that. So these people are really, really very close to death. So for near-death experiences to occur at a time like that, absolutely medically inexplicable.
Dr. Pim Von Lommel, would you like to make a response?
Yes, I would like to.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we found in our prospective study of 344 survivors of cardiac arrest is that 80% reported an NDE and 82% did not. And there was no explanation why just 80% of those patients reported an NDE. There was no difference between the two groups in the duration of cardiac arrest, the duration of unconsciousness. So 5 minutes unconscious or 3 weeks in coma didn't matter at all. Or medication, nothing interfered with why people had an NDE or not. But we did a longitudinal study as well. And we found that only patients who reported an NDE had this classical transformation. So no fear of death anymore, believe in an afterlife. And new insight was important in life as well, and enhanced intuitive sensitivity as well. And we know from children under the age of 5 who don't remember the NDE all have transformation. So for me, the 82% who did not report an NDE I think they did not have an NDE. And the question is why. We know from young children, there was one prospective study done by Melvin Moore, said more than 70% had an NDE. In the retrospective studies, we find 30 to 40% people who have an NDE, and usually by car accidents, etc. So in our study was the mean age 62 years old, but we found that the patients who were younger than 6 years had more often an NDE. We found that people who had an NDE at a younger age had more often an NDE. We found that people who had been in coma for weeks and had problems with their short-term memory reported less NDE. So you need a good functioning short-time memory to report an NDE. So the question is still, why do only 80% of the patients do not report an NDE? I think at younger age, the connection between consciousness and the body and the brain is far more loose. And when you had, as a younger age, an NDE, or women who had sexual abuse went out of the body, have more often an NDE at adult age. So the connection has been loose as well. And when you have a cardiac arrest, you are resuscitated within 5 to 10 minutes. Not all people went out of the body. They need more time, perhaps 30 minutes, perhaps 1 hour. I'm convinced that everybody who will die will have a death experience. But when you resuscitate patients in cardiac arrest at older age, not everybody has the time and the chance to get out of the body. So that's my experience, but it's a speculation. It's not science, it's a speculation.
Thank you, Dr. Van Lommel. Would you like to respond to that?
Wow, thank you. You all heard from the expert. So Pim, I hope you have a chance to talk on with this group someday. I'll sure sign up too. So thanks for sharing those very insightful things. For those that don't know Dr. Lommel, he's done by far the largest prospective study of near-death experiences been published. We have learned an enormous amount from Dr. Van Lommel, not only from the Dutch study that was done some time ago, but from his enormous contributions to investigations of near-death experiences going forward. And I really appreciate those very insightful remarks, Dr. Van Lommel. The only thing I'll mention is we got into that issue of most people don't have near-death experiences when they nearly die. In a fairly small percentage, somewhere 10 to 20%-ish, depending on who you read, may have near-death experiences. Had one interesting thing I'll bring up, again, just as speculation and as hypothesis raising and not as a definitive answer, but we did have one near-death experiencer, I recall, who had an encounter with God, and it was an extremely blissful near-death experience. And she was just in awe of the beauty, the wonderful things she was feeling, and asked God directly, why me? Why was I allowed to have this happen? And God's response was, love falls on everyone equally. This is what you needed to live your earthly life. And from that raises the hypothesis that some people may have near-death experiences because they need that for their earthly life as broadly defined, whereas that's apparently less critical for others. So I'll just throw that out, that N equals 1 on that example. Again, we're back to that. What we don't know about near-death experience far outweighs what we do know, but it's fast. The journey is fascinating.
All right, that's great. We're glad we had a greater spectrum of a reply on that one. A comment from Rudy was he didn't see anyone eating food. Most were working time. They didn't see people taking potty breaks or lovemaking. In his life review, it was mostly important interactions with others and the experience of nature during his NDE. Mm-hmm. Did you encounter that with your research?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thanks for sharing that. It is rare to have, well, first of all, in NDE research, by the time you have study a lot of NDEs, one thing you learn quickly is you don't say always and you don't say never, because there's always going to be that rare near-death experience that will be the exception to the rule. It's very rare that you encounter people describing gustatory or taste from eating things during a near-death experience, but I have run into that. I don't recall anybody that took a potty break during near-death experience. So unlike our earthly life, so that's it too. So just an interesting question here. But the concept of food does seem to be real. We had an interesting NDE shared by a toddler, basically, who was under the age of 2 when they had a life-threatening event before she could express it verbally. And as she slowly grew to be verbal, she told her mother, had a very clearly documented life-threatening event, very nearly died, but grew up to tell her mother, in bits and pieces, why, yes, I had a near-death experience, and was sort of shocked her mother didn't understand there's life after death, and drew up, speaking of gustatory or things you eat, one of the first things she did was draw what she told her mother was a cookie she encountered in heaven. Huge thing with lights and everything, very beautiful, and it certainly looked good. It's one of the first things she seemed to be able to draw as she became verbal and had the coordination to draw and sharing her near-death experience. So again, you never know what people eat there, what age.
Okay, statement of affirmation on the after effects is that Veronica shared that yes, definitely life changed, earth was hard after, and affirmation that these Zoom meetings and NDE groups are amazing support and provide amazing support and knowledge. So we appreciate your insights. I do have 44 new messages, so we're going to jump into another question here. Louise asks, are there any particular personality characteristics or other similarities between those who experience NDEs? Are they more likely to have had a previous spiritual or psychic experience prior to the NDE? Or do NDEs happen randomly?
Yeah, good question. Some years ago, I co-authored a scholarly book chapter. The book was Handbook of Near-Death Experiences, which was a review of all published literature up to the time we did the book. I was involved with characteristics of Western near-death experiences, and we looked exactly at that. Was there anything you could predict based on personality type? There wasn't really, as I recall, a lot of good studies about a prior spiritual psychic experience, but the bottom line is we couldn't find any correlates with any demographic information, gender, job, age, personality type, anything that for decades researchers have looked at really wasn't convincing in terms of predicting that they would have a near-death experience, or if they did have a near-death experience, what the content would be. I would say, based on general principles, though, I think if someone's had a prior spiritual experience and a special or psychic experience, some non-earthly experience, and if they've had the courage to share that with others, if they then have a near-death experience, they may, from their prior life experiences, be predisposed to have the courage, be in the group of people around them, friends, family, loved ones, where they feel more comfortable sharing their near-death experience. So I think that's probably for real.
Okay. This is more in line with the second book, God in the Afterlife. It's a comment from Ms. Lufkin.
So again,
not even going to try to... I'm not going to try to pronounce that first name. I might not get it right. But the comment is, I think some people do not use the word God. For example, people from Eastern Europe or Russia, we were prohibited from believing in God, and we just call it the universe. So did that term come up in some of your surveys?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but the many near-death experiencers would say, and I think I said something to the effect of, they would describe God as being an earthly word. And the entity, the God they encountered in their near-death experience was far beyond words, far beyond anything on earth, far beyond description in any language. And so, yeah, people, absolutely, the universe, the one, the all, there are a huge number of descriptors have been used by near-death experiencers to describe God, and I'm sure they're all accurate. And by the way, did I hear you say we have about 40 questions? If so, I'll try to boogie right along when I answer them.
Yes, and we can, some of these would just be an affirmation. Thank you for answering their questions. So the next one is Germ. Now you mentioned something about if you ask a hospice nurse about NDE experiences, make sure you have time to listen for a full answer. And he just confirms, he says, I am a hospice bereavement counselor, and I have found that the messages in NDEs, after death communications, and deathbed visions can help in the pre-bereavement and post-bereavement process when clients raise questions related to life after death. Have you been approached on this use of the information you have obtained?
What was that question again?
Well, I kind of added that. Do you find your information is, your research is being found in the same way to help counsel those who are dealing with death now, death of a loved one?
Oh, absolutely. Now, as a radiation oncology physician, I'm dealing with people that have a life-threatening illness every day. Many of these people have advanced incurable cancer, and they know they're going to die, and so do their friends, family, loved ones that accompany with them. So for them those that are familiar with my work and want to talk about that, in fact, I'll even give free copies of my book out to a number of my patients. I've heard over and over again that this is profoundly reassuring information. This really helps people to come to grips with the inevitability of their own death. It helps their friends, family, and loved ones to realize that although death may occur, it's not the end. And they're all going to be together again in a wonderful, joyous afterlife. So this has been extremely helpful in me working with my patients that deal with cancer. So I've seen that firsthand. And certainly, I've heard a lot from counselors. Many people can bring up this type of research and help reassure people that fear their own mortality or their loved one's mortality. This is extremely helpful, informative, and inspirational information that can help them deal with their anxieties.
Okay. And Catherine just expressed gratitude for your entire presentation today and indicates she buys your books almost as soon as they're on the shelf. So encouraging others, if they didn't get the full briefing, to buy the books because they are very thorough. Another comment about God is the vocabulary we have to describe feeling. My opinion, not everybody say they meet God. Some say power or force or loving creatures. And we mentioned before, in European countries, they might discuss the universe. Just an affirmation, there's a lot of different titles for the same higher being.
And can I jump on that? What we really need is in talking about the spiritual, the ineffable, which means difficult or impossible to describe in words. It's almost like, as I do my research, we need a new language for this. I mean, you just have such a wide variety of descriptors of the beauty, the wonder of the afterlife. People seem to fall all over their words in trying to describe it. God, the light that they encounter. It's almost like we need a whole new universal vocabulary so that we can talk not only in English, but talk with our colleagues worldwide in a language with terms that we've all agreed to and can understand. That might actually help understand research into these types of spiritual things and sharing. Just a thought.
Oh yeah, and you got input here from Tamara and Wendy saying the same thing. There are comments like the one that is, or the source of all. The use of the word unity and unity consciousness. Those are all new words that would go into expanding the dialogue of this whole thing. I've got Garm. He asked, he's commenting on Joseph Campbell's description of God. God is a metaphor for something that transcends all categories of human thought. So the different vocabulary goes back many years.
Yeah, that's good. I'll tell you one thing, it's been humbling to study near-death experiences. Anybody that thinks they're smart or clever, you start reading about the astounding acceleration of consciousness in that afterlife realm, reviewing your whole life, prior life in minutes, universal knowledge that is beyond anything we can possibly hold in our brain. There's no question that the afterlife, the knowledge, I mean, we're really, and as some near-death experiencers have said it succinctly, this is the boot camp of our eternal existence. There's much, much more that lies ahead, and we're all much, much more than our physical earthly bodies and lives.
I'm encountering a lot of comments of gratitude for the information you presented today, but I do have another question from Tamara. I asked, she wanted to ask you if you have done much research with multiple NDEers If so, how do you feel they may differ from the one-timers?
Yeah, interesting question. We have a small percentage of people that have had multiple near-death experiences. It's amazing to see how many times people can encounter a life-threatening event and survive. It's very interesting. There is no one definite thing you can say about that. Sometimes these multiple near-death experiencers start down the path of a particular near-death experience. Then with their next near-death experience, they sort of take up where they left off originally and go forward and have more of an experience. So it sort of seems to be like a continuity of experience. For others, the near-death experiences seem to be completely different. They're sort of completely different content, different ideas, and everything in between. So it's hard to really generalize about people with multiple near-death experiences, except they're for real, and you're very glad they keep surviving. Hope it doesn't happen anymore. That they have a life-threatening event, that is.
Some of them prove to be great resources for SAI. Next question is from Sarah. Is there any evidence for the existence of hell? Reincarnation?
Yeah, okay. That's a great, so reincarnation, yeah, that's a good question. I'll just flat out say this. Before I did my research, I thought reincarnation was ridiculous. But I'm also a person who's guided by evidence. If there's evidence, I go by what the evidence shows. Okay, we have a lot of near-death experiences that talk about reincarnation. Very often they occur during the life review where they're seeing their prior life on Earth, and then boom, all of a sudden they become aware of details of existence of a life prior to this earthly life. And it's not unusual for them to describe a remembrance of many prior lives. Interestingly, they may be male, female, anywhere else on the world. As a researcher, I keep a close eye on this and say, well, gee, how many were Cleopatra? None. They all typically describe mundane earthly life, sort of the standard, humdrum life of that time, often in extraordinary detail. For instance, we had one person describe life in a prior life remembrance, a reincarnated life, when they were in a medieval castle back before the Renaissance. And if you ever think that medieval life in a walled city is like spiring castles and knights in shining armor, listen to what they described. They described the walled city as being crowded, it's stinking, it was muddy and it was filthy, and it was a horrible place to live. But don't forget, in that era, if you didn't have that wall around you, given the risk of attack by thieves or marauding armies, that living inside a walled city literally saved your life, even though it was, by their very description, quite gross. And that is the reality of life in a walled city many, many centuries ago. So that's sort of an example of the gripping reality we often see when people describe their prior lives, suggesting that reincarnation. So now, obviously, I've accepted that reincarnation is, certainly over and over and over described in near-death experiences and described very realistically. And believe me, that was a change in what I believed 20 years ago.
Okay, first part of that question was evidence for the existence of hell.
Oh, existence of hell?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. We have, now that's an interesting topic. You have to be very, very careful when you study near-death experiences and look for what's considered hell. Having a life-threatening event and often the recovery period after that can be a hellish, in quotation marks, experience. I mean, you can be in the intensive care unit. There can be some alterations of thought, and it's often distorted thought and very frightening. I've been impressed that the majority of purported hellish NDEs that I've read from other authors are probably more like intensive care unit, if the delusional experiences as they recover from their life-threatening event, and not something that actually occurred during the near-death experience. So if you raise the bar for what is a hellish experience very high and say you have to basically timestamp it right to the time they had the near-death experience, when they were observing their body and the out-of-body experience, and basically having that whole experience occur before they, had consciousness and woke up before they got to the ICU, not a week after. I still found about 20 truly hellish near-death experiences. So I don't know that I should make any sweeping conclusions on that, but I can say a couple things. First of all, they obviously exist, and they are definitely near-death experiences. The second thing I can say is that these hellish realms of hell, seem to be separate from the unearthly wet realms, if you will. In other words, we've had near-death experiencers describe traveling with an unearthly heavenly realm and being shown a existence, a sort of a confined area where they're told you don't want to go there, that's hell. So the people that say there's no hell in the afterlife in heaven are technically absolutely correct. It seems to be a very confined area. The second thing, again, preliminarily based on just n equals about 20, is that it seems that people that are in this unearthly hellish realm, interestingly, weren't condemned there by some judgmental supreme being. Interestingly, it seems that these beings got into hell because they chose to go there. They wanted to be there because they were in an environment with other beings like them that seemed to be a part of what they were. So these are people, if you will, very dark souls, and they're going to be comfortable in dark souls. Don't forget, in the afterlife in heaven, you are known instantly for who you are, all you are, and everything that you are. So if you're a spiritual being and you've got that spiritual sickness, darkness, just, who knows why we see people like that on earth, but it seems to happen in the afterlife too. So they seem to be able to freely choose to go there, and they seem to be able to freely choose, if they so desire, to leave there. But they have to want to leave. They have to leave there and make that choice. We do see other spiritual beings at times present with the Indy ear in the hellish realm and get them out upon request. So I don't want to go too far afield on hellish near-death experiences. What we don't know way outweighs what we do know. But I will tell you, it's my opinion, and I think it's shared by the great majority of near-death experience researchers, that the best of near-death experience evidence, which is enormous, is that there is not a permanent involuntary hell. I think our heritage for each and every one of us really is, at a minimum, the choice to be in that blissful, wonderful afterlife, as I've been talking about. I guess it's a choice to go to hell too, for the very dark, that maybe that's where you're going to find Hitler. Hitler obviously might be much more comfortable being with beings like him in hellish realm in the afterlife than with beings where love rules the universe, for example.
Yes, and there was a carry-on comment about that, about the book written by Howard Storm. So you could research him as an author, and he was one who had a distressing NDE, and he made a positive life out of it afterwards.
I got to make one more quick comment on that. That's an extremely important point. Even among the people that encountered themselves hellish near-death experiences, I mean, just unimaginable to virtually any of us. Very important to say, virtually all of them, when they recovered from their near-death experience, what nearly killed them, they also believed exactly what I just said, that it's not a threat. A hellish realm is not a threat to them or anybody else. That the afterlife really is a realm of love and peace and joy, and that these people, even that encountered those hellish experiences, some of them would say, this is something I had to learn. I had to confront those issues in my earthly life of anger, of resentment, of darkness, and that there was literally no other way that I could have dealt with that in my earthly life other than to have that experience. So yes, very typically they'll have those very positive after effects, reduce their fear of death, increase belief in an afterlife, and increase belief in a wonderful afterlife, even after literally going through hell.
So I find that a very positive point to pause at. We've got 5 minutes, and I know you indicated you would be willing to stay to answer some questions. I've got either 59 questions or comments still to go, but we do have our official closing, which we'd like to, for those that did not save extra time on their schedule to stay with us, we're going to go ahead and do our official closing and stop the recording, but we will stay on the line for additional questions.
Yeah, I'll be here as long as you want, so go ahead.
Okay, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Vice President, Robert Beer.
Actually, no, I'm going to take over at this point.
Sorry.
Actually, just to expand on what Linda's saying, that we're deviating from our normal program today. Usually we try to end up at 2 hours, but because there are so many questions and because Dr. Jeffrey Long has agreed to answer them, we will continue with the recording so that people will not miss out on the question and answers. If you want to stay on till the very end, please do. But if you need to leave now, that is fine. And with that, I would say, Linda, could you just please take us on to the next question, and we'll do the closing at the very end, please.
Okay, sounds good. And I like this one. This one will be interesting. And this is going to be a challenging question for you, Dr. Long. It seems that doctors and other medical professionals are becoming increasingly open to the reality of NDEs. Is that your finding in discussions with others in the medical community? And that question came from Chuck.
Yeah, great question. I've given several talks to what they call grand rounds or physician groups, allied health professional groups, and to get what's called continuing medical education credit for that presentation, which they will do, you fill out an evaluation and you put down comments. So I've had a chance to see comments about this type of talk given to doctors and other allied healthcare professionals. In the times I've done that recently, I have been astounded at how positive the responses are. Remarkably, I get very high marks, and the comments, you know, even given their radically varied beliefs about an afterlife, and certainly some percentage of doctors are atheists, but to my astonishment, the comments that are written in are great majority of them are very, very positive, very much believe that they've learned something from this presentation and it's going to help them to practice their medicine or their allied health professional activities. And I feel really good about that. That's undoubtedly a shift over the past period of many decades. Shortly after near-death experiences were first described, the great majority of doctors and allied health professionals didn't know about near-death experience and would have unfortunately, tragically misdiagnosed near-death experiences in some pathologic category. That's pretty much ended. As I said earlier, to misdiagnose a near-death experience today as some pathologic entity is, in my opinion, medical malpractice. The good news is, and it's not even just doctors that know about it, it's actually the allied health professionals, nurses, that tend to be much more knowledgeable about near-death experience than the doctors today, which is really interesting. So if patients can't share with their doctors, there's usually a nurse or two or three or other allied health professionals that know much more about near-death experience than their doctor. And that can really help patients to learn about what they experienced and grow from it.
Okay. And from Carol Ring, she states, I was thrilled to hear Dr. Long's talk. I can channel dead people, Jesus, Mother Mary, and God. What I have learned by my channeling is exactly what Dr. Long has expressed in NDEs. God often says, love yourself as much as possible, then love others a wee bit more. Love will solve all the problems that exist on earth. So she gave it as a statement, and I'm going to turn that into a question. As you did your research for your second book concerning God, how much of that guidance did direct others to do a reflection on themselves, to love themselves as much as others?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the real deep knowledge of what I presented here and in my book, God in the Afterlife, is not so much to focus on other people's experiences, but to focus on yourself. In other words, what have you learned about that? How can what you've learned help you to be a more loving, compassionate person to the people that you live? I think that's the real strength of this type of research, is in helping people, empowering people to live their lives with less fear, more courage, less concern about their own or their loved one's mortality, more realization that their earthly lives, even if they think they're mundane, they're not at all. They're extremely meaningful and significant, and to reach out with their friends, family, loved ones, and the whole world with more love and compassion. I think that's the ultimate, most deep message that we have in my research.
Yes, I feel that in my own personal life. We have to understand these questions don't always come in chronological order. There is another reflection here on from Linda Yu on LSD experiences. And she states those experiences don't necessarily parallel NDEs, but guided experiences under ayahuasca or other plant hallucinogens have elicited experiences similar to NDEs. How many indicates that there are other books on this subject? So when you did your study, did you go through those that had a guided experience?
Yeah, I didn't really, I had my plate full doing all the with the mammoth amount of evidence I had and what I wanted to communicate. I haven't really studied, I'm not really an authority on guided experiences associated with illicit substances. I will admit that some psychotropic substances are being studied in a very ethical, scholarly manner, particularly DMT. So we'll see what they show. I think that's the most credible. And again, back to what I said earlier, if you really want to see what ayahuasca experiences really are like, guided or unguided, spin on down the internet to Erowid, EROWID.org, look up ayahuasca and read them yourself from the people that actually experienced it. I did, and I don't find them to be particularly similar to near-death experiences.
Okay. Veronica went back and she was talking about something with these distressing NDEs. She doesn't use that terminology, but she states during her NDE, she saw a few people's lives and feelings that they were abused in life, yet they felt so much love. They were abusive in life, yet felt so much love and forgiveness toward them. So that would be people that were abusive to others, yet they experienced love and forgiveness.
That love transcends all. I mean, that's really an inspiring thing. And I see that over and over. You know, we're fallible here on earth, and some of us make big mistakes like being abusive. It's just a vivid example from what you shared that love is the greatest power in the universe.
True. Getting down to comment range, Rudy expressed that the music is beyond the human experience. Any comments on music from experiences that have come up in your research?
Yeah, we have some near-death experiencers during their near-death experience describe earthly music so beautiful that it's beyond anything they ever heard on earth and beyond anything possible on earth. It's been, it's described, it can be harmonious, it can involve seemingly like analogous to voices on earth singing it, but it seems to be something that is another one of those many, many things that occurs during near-death experience. Dramatic, absolutely nothing to correlate in their prior life experience, and just a part of that overwhelming beauty that exists in the afterlife, or in that, if you will, the heavenly realms. So we see that. I recall one near-death experiencer who heard this unearthly beautiful music, and he tried to capture it in making music afterwards, and it was certainly very beautiful music, but even he admitted this just simply could not capture in earthly music, that he was very adept at creating the unearthly beauty, overwhelming beauty of the music in his near-death experience.
Okay, this one's a little bit different. This is from Maxine, asking any records of NDEs during suicide attempts? If so, what are their characteristics?
Yes, suicide unfortunately can precipitate a near-death experience. The content of suicide associated near-death experiences seems to be, as best I can tell, pretty similar to typical near-death experiences. In other words, there doesn't seem to be some, typically there's no external judgment for their suicide or threats of punishment because they committed suicide. The person who's done the most work on that is the NDE researcher, Dr. Bruce Greyson, who is a psychiatrist, had a special interest in suicide and near-death experiences. And as I recall, his outstanding research on the topic, near-death experiences seem to be the same as near-death experiences occurring under other circumstances. And importantly, an important finding of Dr. Greyson, was that after somebody has attempted suicide and has a near-death experience, they almost never attempt suicide again. And that's rare among suicide attempters because they have a predisposition to attempt suicide over and over and over. And yet if they have a near-death experience, it seems that they come back increasingly aware of the importance and significance of the earthly life in spite of its great difficulties, and it greatly reduces their predisposition to attempt suicide again. So again, after effects seem to have that, if you will, to some extent protective effect from future suicide attempts.
Okay. CJ is taking us back to the question on education. You had already shared that you have been called on to do presentations for CMEs. And his question is there a need for training about NDEs and deathbed visions in US medical schools? So I guess we're seeking an expansion of what you've already shared. Where are you being asked to share this information? How frequently are you being welcomed?
Yeah, that's a good question. There absolutely is a need for educating the physicians of tomorrow in medical school about near-death experiences. Otherwise, they're going to hear it second, third hand from other people, and it may be biased information from disbelieving attendings, typically attendings that don't know anything about near-death. They may not know anything about near-death experience, but they darn sure are going to hold on to their negative opinion. So they really need to learn the facts about near-death experience. And there's been enough research now for decades that we have a good body of scholarly, published, high-quality evidence about near-death experience that is certainly appropriate and reasonable to present in medical school, given that near-death experiences are common and they're profoundly life-changing. And it can certainly help people to adjust after a near-death experience to first and foremost know that it was a real experience. So I really wish they could teach that more in school. It's only been a few times I've been asked to talk to large physician groups. So, I'm certainly not carrying the banner, but it needs to be more an organized, concerted effort. I hope, maybe this organization or others could sort of continue to keep that hope out there that we can interest medical schools and the educators of other allied health professionals that near-death experiences are important and worth at least a brief section during the education of not only for physicians, but allied health professionals. I think it would really make a profound difference. So that's a good question. If I can help, and I'll just say to the whole group here, if anybody has any ideas and I can help with that, please let me know, because it's really that important.
I'm going to expand on that too, because it took me a long time before I had the courage to speak about NDEs in public. But then once I did, every physician I saw, I asked them what they knew about NDEs. And if they were obviously ignorant, I gave them some books to read for their own self-education. We can all do that. Increase opportunities for Dr. Long to share. Okay, another one on suicide. A lot more comments. Okay, for Dr. Long, this is from Craig. How do things such as being psychic, telepathic, play out in the earthly realm?
So the question, how does being psychic or telepathic play out in the earthly realm? That's outside of my area of expertise. I know a fair amount about near-death experiences, but I'm certainly aware that there are some people that have some psychic and telepathic abilities, and that's actually been described not uncommonly as an after effect after near-death experiences. The problem is a lot of the psychic and telepathic abilities that I know most about as an after effect of an NDE are admittedly not well studied. I mean, that's just crying out for people to do the studies, help know its strengths, its weaknesses, its importance, its limitations, and it's just one of the many things that we don't know with regards to near-death experience. Regarding to psychic phenomena as a whole, that's a whole new and different, or that not new, but certainly a whole different area of academic pursuit with a large number of researchers actively involved in that, publishing some very good data on that, which is interesting. So I just can't comment much more than that. Sorry.
Okay, because Joy kind of carried that question on, stating that she knows of several experiencers who have developed or improved their psychic abilities. And have you seen that? You would have to be following somebody with their after effects to know if they actually improved.
You know, I think something like that really cries out for some good, strong, objective data. One well-studied after effect was electrical sensitivity, done by a prominent researcher, Dr. Jan Holden, and published in the Journal of Near-Death Studies a few years ago. So we all heard about this. For example, near-death experiencers often say they can't wear a watch. I'm not wearing a watch just because I'm not because I have electrical sensitivity. But you hear that a lot, especially with near-death experiencer groups. So Dr. Holden did a study with near-death experiencers, and as I recall, the conclusion of her study from a number of years ago, there was some suggestion, but certainly nothing conclusive, that there might be some electrical sensitivity. It was certainly worth further investigation, but you know, this just shows the variability of occurrence of this type of phenomena after a near-death experience, and the importance of trying to study it rigorously so we can get some, you know, some scholarly, good scientific methodology behind some of these important phenomena. I think they're real. I think we just need to clarify them better with some further investigation. Oh, as far as the people that have them, though, they know darn good and well what their abilities are in psychics. You don't need these scientific studies to convince people that have them. You know darn good and well you've got them. It's just we're trying to learn ourselves, people that haven't had a near-death experience and haven't had that type of psychic ability, you know, learn a little bit about it. What can we learn, grow from it? And geez, how can we help, you know, in turn help humanity with some of these people that seem to have these remarkable gifts?
True. There has been some, just sharing with all, because this comes up in comments, there's been some other resources available recently. Dr. Kerr's presentation on our website, also the Netflix presentation of Surviving Death, gets into some of the mediumship, some of the after effects of NDEs. The first of those was all about NDEs. There's also a large number of talks on TED Talks. Here's a question. Okay, this is from Lynn, referring to Dr. Michael Newton's studies, PhD, wrote books on life between lives, case studies. Do those who have NDE speak about previous lives?
Yeah, I think it's Michael Newton's Life Between Life. That is, I believe he did, as I recall, regression therapy. Correct me if I'm right. I'm not an authority on that, but I've heard that from a lot of people, and I know something of his research. Found a lot of things remarkably similar to what we're finding with near-death experiences, and I think a lot of people noted a lot of parallels with that. You know, just another good example that we need more researchers to research with every methodology possible, like Dr. Newton. You know, so that we can all learn and grow. But as I said earlier, what's real is consistently observed. So if you're coming at near-death experiences from different methodologies and observing the same thing, that's further strong evidence for the reality of not only near-death experiences, but their consistent message in the afterlife.
Yeah, I'll fix that. Michael Newton was most known for Destiny of Souls, and well, that was a big one, Destiny of Souls. I had a question from Shayla. I'm going to go back. I wasn't sure how to state it, but I'm just going to read it now that I understand the wording a little bit better. Has any thought been given to the notion that NDEers witness things in appearances that are familiar to them specifically, so that to allow them to access information that might be otherwise unassimilable, such as seeing angels as a direct experience of a Godhead who would be uninterpretable?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some things that occur during a near-death experience that, you know, are related to your life, prior life experiences. For example, people in Christian background countries are going to be much more likely to encounter Jesus. People in Muslim countries are going to be are not likely to encounter Jesus or any of the associates of their outside of their religious belief. I mean, if people have never seen a skyscraper, they're probably not going to see a skyscraper. So I think certainly to some extent, near-death experiences sort of require that ability to see in the afterlife something that seems to correlate with their prior life experiences. I mean, don't forget, They may describe mountains, valleys, streams, things that have a correlate on Earth, and yet they're completely different in the sense that they're non-physical. They have a beauty beyond anything on Earth, and so there's something, there's sort of analogous to earthly experiences, and yet it's so many ways radically different. So I hope that answers the question. It seemed to have several parts to it.
Yeah. Okay. This is from Rudy, how many experiencers, NDE experiencers, report or believe in reincarnation? In my own NDE, returning to my body, I clearly recall saying, I have done this many times before, meaning I have lived other lives.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Absolutely, we hear, I have a few dozen near-death experiences that directly address reincarnation, and many, many more that say exactly that. They sort of have a sense of an awareness of, this isn't my first time on Earth. You know, here we go, or here we go again, you know, back. One thing I'll point out, when people are in that afterlife, that unearthly realm, it's common for them to feel at home. All of a sudden they feel that unearthly realm of beauty and love and peace is their real home, their true home. And that's one reason they're so reluctant to leave that afterlife realm to return to their earthly body. But there's no question they really sense the real home all at once is the afterlife, and their earthly life that they lived all their prior existence in up to their remembrance is not their real home. So we see that over and over again in near-death experiences. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about reincarnation earlier. There's some quite strong evidence for reincarnation. Interestingly, an interesting question would be, can you reincarnate in non-earthly forms? And those are rare expressions where they seem to recall some prior life, not of this earthly life, but as an existence on some other planet in the universe. So we do have that evidence in near-death experiences relatively rarely. We also have some near-death experiences going a little bit aside here, where they actually observe life on planets not of this Earth during their near-death experience. They can see more evolved life, they can see less evolved life. These are fairly rare NDEs, but again, very dramatic, and really just part of why near-death experiences need to be studied more, because they may contain extremely important information, literally, potentially the only direct observation that we have in all of our human knowledge of life on other planets. And that's very interesting. We've had one describe a water world. They didn't have land. They were intelligent life existing in water and everything in between. So, and the beings they describe are notably different from human beings that we know on Earth a lot of times. So interesting sort of sidelight about reincarnation and life described in near-death experience in other realms in general.
Okay, when we spoke about Dr. Newton, Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls were his books, and he obtained his information through regression therapy. And that kind of takes us into this next question, which we might use this as a closer, even though there's a lot more. It says, is it possible that a higher percentage of people have NDEs but don't remember them?
I think in general, the great majority of people remember near-death experiences immediately when they recover from their life-threatening event. Others, it may be minutes, hours, days, weeks, or even longer before they remember their near-death experiences, but those are distinctly in the minority. It's possible that they forget near-death experiences. I don't think we can really comment how often that happens, because heck, they've forgotten them. And so how do we find that out later? But I would say the seemingly quite small percentage of people that recall a near-death experience a prolonged period of time after it happens is a very small percentage indeed. So that's suggestive evidence that near-death experiences tend not to be forgotten. You either have it or you don't. And typically, if you have one, it's something you remember. It seems to be embedded in the remembrance or the consciousness more so than other life events at the time. So I think it's probably, I mean, we don't know for sure. That's the most direct answer is we don't really know, but I would hypothesize, guess that people, if you have a near-death experience, it was meant to be. You were meant to have that experience, and then you were meant to remember it.
Okay. So Yvonne, Dr. Cason, do you think we should wrap up at this point? If we do so, what we can do is we can save this chat. And for those questions directly addressed to Dr. Long, we can find a way to get a response to the person at a later date. That being the case with the 80 new messages, I think it's a good point to go ahead and wrap this up, and we will save this chat and respond back to individuals as we can.
I should say in closing, a huge thanks to people that are now going to be shutting off. These are fantastic questions. I've really appreciated these insightful, thoughtful questions here. This is a great group, and my hat's off and huge thanks to not only those of you that listened today, but certainly the fine folks that put on this presentation today. It's a real honor and a privilege to get to share today. Thank you all.
And I truly enjoyed having your presentation cover such a wide field of information. For those that are using chat, we are learning, and we're going to share what we've learned. The lower right-hand corner of your chat box has 3 dots. And if you want to save this chat on your computer, you can do so also. So
now we'll turn it over to Tamara.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Dr. Jeffrey Long for staying so much longer, and what a marvelous presentation. And I could just have so much more. So I'm very proud to be a sponsor of today's SAI presentation, which I thought was a tremendous success. So thank you so much. And thank everyone for staying a little bit longer. Just a couple things. Those of you that don't know me, I am a 6-time near-death experiencer and a multiple spiritually transformative experiencer. I created the Seeking Heaven, the Near-Death Experience and Other Phenomena channel 5 months ago, and we almost have 8,000 subscribers, and it's booming. And the quality of the near-death experience stories, and not only the stories, but how that person is transitioning in this world through and understanding that experience and the projects they're working on now is just so exciting to meet these people. So I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and to look at that. It was created by and for NDEers and STEers, so it would be a safe, loving soul community. So I encourage you to join that and subscribe. Also, I wanted to say I'm very proud to be an affiliate network with the Seeking Heaven, I just shorten it, the Seeking Heaven channel. And each month we're going to be offering an SAI speaker spotlight, 30 minutes. And we're going to do it, it's going to launch on my channel a week before the speaker comes out. So you'll get a sneak preview of what they're going to talk about. So that's something that I wanted to do. And we already have a couple of those on there of Dr. Jeffrey Long. We have a couple of things with that. And also Dr. Yvonne Cason and Robert Baer, which they have several of their NDE stories, the founders of SAI, on my channel. So check that out. And let's see if I covered anything. Oh, and we just finished a really cute segment with Robert Baer on puppy love, and his was the best. We had 6 NDEers talking about their relationship with animals in the afterlife, and it's so cute. I have to tell you, it's I'm proud of this. I used to own an ad agency 27 years, and I'm most proud of this, of anything I've ever done and all the awards I've won, because it's so from the heart. So you'll have to check that out. And Dr. Yvonne Cason was also a love leader this month and spoke about divine love, and that was very powerful. It's an hour long. You'll have to check that out. So I want to thank you both, Dr. Robert Baer and Dr. Yvonne Cason, for letting me be a part of the SAI Speaker Spotlight and also an affiliate network, and also being a sponsor today. What you're doing, I think, is groundbreaking, and I'm super excited about everything that's going to be happening in the conference. And this is such a wonderful platform that's so warm and inviting for a spiritual community. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Robert so he can have closing remarks.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you for everything you've done for us. And also your Seeking Heaven show, and of course, co-sponsoring this event.
Thank
you. I
just
want to remind everybody that Spiritual Awakenings International has or presents online speaker events the 3rd Saturday of each month. They are free. Our next speaker, which will be Saturday, March 20th, is Dr. Bonnie Greenwell. And Dr. Bonnie Greenwell will be talking about the impact of Kundalini activation and consciousness shifts in spiritual awakening. Coincidentally, she is a member of our SAI advisory board, as is Tamara Calden Richardson. And we'd like to have each of you check out our beautiful Spiritual Awakenings International website. There's so much information on STEs. And if you haven't subscribed to it, please do it. It's free. And I want to especially thank Dr. Jeffrey Long today because I'm an experiencer. It was so wonderful. You hit it out of the park today. Fabulous job, because you covered some things that anybody that's been an experiencer, you wonder if you're crazy or if you're out of the norm or whatever. Thank you for touching the topics that you did. This is, SAI is by experiencers for experiencers. And you just hit it out of the park. Thank you so much. And also, Dr. Pim Van Lommel for pitching in. What a tremendous thing to have happen. Well, I'm going to turn this over to Yvonne to conclude. Thank you all and see you next month, March 20th.
So I just want to say thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Dr. Jeffrey Long. Your talk was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. And we are really proud to have you on our Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor. So congratulations. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, adios, buenos tardes, arrivederci, dag, farewell, ciao. Bye everyone, see you in a month.